chat about entrepreneurship.
Okay. Well, we did a test earlier this afternoon to see if I could load my presentation. And my computer wouldn't let me do it. So we've developed a workaround. And Jim's going to load the deck, but I'm going to have to tell him to flip the slides. Okay. Everybody hear me?
Yep.
Good. So it's a pretty broad topic, entrepreneurship, and I can probably cover it in a 5-minute overview. I can cover it in a semester course, and I can cover it in a lifetime and probably not hit all of the different notes. I know we have a couple of experts in the audience on it, some of whom have taught an entrepreneurship course, probably agree with what I'm saying. There's always something that creeps out of the woodwork that you weren't thinking about. But there are different product aspects and subsets, service aspects and subsets, of course, the financial subsets. I'm not going to spend too much time on funding, except to say there's a bunch of different ways to do it, ranging from angel investors through venture capital, crowdfunding, small business administration, friends and family, offering memorandum to groups of investors, grants, small business credit cards. I mean, you name it, people think of ways to procure money. What I'm going to spend some time on is just the whole concept of entrepreneurship. So we'll define it in very simple terms to begin with, as next slide.
Okay.
There's a delay in my clicker.
Yeah. What is, there we go.
There we go. So in broad terms, it's setting up a business and taking on financial, and I added in there, and personal risk with the goal of making a, whoop, now my clicker went ahead.
Oh, you're working now. Okay.
Yeah,
Your
I go
clicker's
back
working.
backwards.
No? Okay. I thought you did that.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
if I did, I'm more talented than I thought.
All right.
With the goal of making a profit. Of course, the terms entrepreneurship and profit can have a whole bunch more meanings than just the entrepreneurship and profit. The entrepreneur side of it is possible either as a person or as a corporation or a person within a corporation. So I coined another term that's called intrapreneurship, which is entrepreneurship that occurs within the structure of an existing company. Entrepreneurship, you're completely on your own and no safety net. Profit can have different meanings in terms of you can have an economic profit, financial profit, social profit, ecological profit, and kind of like the theory of matter and energy, they're interchangeable. You can go from being an entrepreneur to being an intrapreneur, for example, if you start a company and then you're bought by a larger company. And so now you're working as an intrapreneur within that larger structure. Conversely, you can go from being an intrapreneur to an entrepreneur. If you've developed a very successful and attractive business within a company where you don't really fit, and that happened within Celanese with the biochem sector, and you end up being spun out as a separate company. So now instead of being an intrapreneur with the safety net under you, you're on your own, baby. You've been shoved out of the nest. So next slide. Pluses of entrepreneurship, obviously flexibility. In the case of intrapreneurship, or entrepreneurship, I mean, you can frequently be hampered by undercapitalization. if you underestimate the funds you're going to need, if you burn it through them too fast, you can be in a situation where you don't have the working capital to continue at the scale that you had previously set for yourself. As an entrepreneur, you have a broader range of partners because as an entrepreneur, you might be limited by anti-competitive measures, by cultural and social restrictions that would not stop you in the case of being on your own. You can be faster, although you might not always be able to work as efficiently and effectively as you could within a corporation without all the stress on you of having to meet payroll. One of the basic things you have to do. You had better understand all aspects of the business, and we'll go through that. And you had better have control over what your dollar buys. In the case of working within a company, you have a lot of the services and infrastructure available to you, which as an entrepreneur, you would have to contract from others. And things as simple as administering your payroll. It's a big relief off of your shoulders to be able to contract that to a service. You have lower overheads in the case of an entrepreneur versus intrapreneur. And we see that a lot in multinational companies that buy small companies in other countries that are in and of themselves quite successful, but when they're put under the whole corporate umbrella, they get kind of stifled by the overhead that they now have to deal with. You are your own boss, but as I said, there is no safety net. Let's go to the next slide. You decided you want to start a business. There's 3 basic questions you need to ask and answer, and you need to answer them honestly. As my father used to say, don't bullshit yourself. First one is you need to answer, is it real? Is this opportunity you see to provide a product or a service a real opportunity? Is it out there? Is it something that you can quantify? And is it something that you can define? Having done that, can you do it? Do you have the technological or technical expertise, or the personnel expertise, or can you acquire this expertise to be able to do it? And once you've answered those, then you add them all up and you say, well, is it worth it? Here's what I can get for it. And I'm going to lose money, or yeah, it is worth it. Let's go ahead. I like and have used for several years now the business plan canvas model. It was developed by Stanford University and is used largely in their entrepreneurship programs. It's also used nationwide in the clean energy competition program. And what it does is it breaks down the business into 9 basic business blocks, which when answered correctly and filled out, gives you a business strategy for the business that you are looking at developing. The 9 segments are the customer segment. For whom are you creating value? We'll go through these in detail, so I'll just go through the headers right now. The customer relationships, the channels by which you're going to supply your product. What is the value proposition that you're bringing to the customer? What key activities do you have to engage in? What key resources do you have to bring into play? Who are partners that can help you do that? And then if you add all of that up, you get a cost structure, which you offset with, we'll call it a benefit stream in case you're looking at a profit defined in terms of ecological or social or anything other than financial terms. So next slide. If you look at the structure and look at the customer segment, you've got this little guy on the right bank, and he's looking across to the left bank, which still doesn't exist. You're looking at him and you're saying, which customers and users am I looking at? Which ones am I going to serve? And which jobs do they really want to get done, or do they need to get done? So then you look at the value proposition. What am I offering them, all tied up in this little package? What is this going to do for them? And do they really even care? So then we look at the next segment, which is the channels. How am I going to get this package across to the right bank from the left bank? How does each customer segment want to be reached, and through which interaction points? Some customers would rather buy through distributors, and others would rather buy directly. So you need to be able to answer for each customer which one they prefer. Do they feel the love that you have for them? Is there any kind of brand loyalty that you can develop? Apple evangelists are an example of this. Customers often buy based on the service that they receive, but not always. Some customers buy based solely on price, and the relationship that they have with you or any of their other suppliers is of minor importance, at least at some point in their business life. You have to look at the use of social networking versus knocking on doors and cold calls. You look at attending conventions, setting up your display booths, meeting a whole bunch of customers in one spot. It's quite heady, and it's a very quick way to get your message out quickly to a very, very wide audience. Look at your advertising, look at your customer acquisition, because in any event, you want and you need repeat customers for long-term success. So let's click to the next one. Looking at your key activities, which activities do you need to perform well in your business model? Understanding your product and service well enough to develop a culture around these crucial activities and programs to ensure that everyone performs them according to the standards that you've established to be able to supply the customer effectively, provide your customer quality and value. Training employees and having a quality control system to ensure key activities is essential for your success, and it's essential that you reach the customer's level of expectation. So let's go to the next slide. Key resources. Well, key resources, back up there. These I usually think of as related to people and key skills, such as technological skills or maybe selling skills. Includes everything you need to make your business successful. It could be something as simple as a different computer. It could be laboratory services. It could be making sure that you have raw materials always available, advertising. Is there a shortage or limited supply of any of the key resources you need? We see this now in the case of the auto companies, where certainly their production capabilities are there, except for a chip. And so they're unable to get cars on any of their dealers' lots because they don't have the chips to put into the car's control system. You need to look at the team that you've assembled and look at the expertise or knowledge required in various areas. You can't be an expert on everything, but you have to make a decision on whether you're going to develop the abilities in-house or whether you're going to contract these from other suppliers, such as, for example, legal services. Some companies have their own legal department, other companies contract exclusively. And some have legal departments that specialize in one area, but need to turn to more specialized legal houses for other services. In the case of Perigo, for example, we often outsourced a lot of the packaging questions to an outside legal service that would tell us just how closely we could mimic a national brand package without getting into trouble. You need to know enough to ask the right questions, because as Rumsfeld famously said, we don't know what we don't know. But in any case, don't be afraid to ask for help. You need reliable suppliers if you're not producing it yourself or are purchasing material. Needs you can set up in long-term contracts or partnership agreements. Some of these work, some don't. In the case of a pivot, which I'll talk about later when we look at some of the examples I've brought, you might have to completely renegotiate long-term contracts or agreements if the direction of your business changes. You need to make sure that the customers can survive and that they have the quality and quantity, your suppliers have the quality and quantity of materials to supply to you so that they can grow with you. You always have to have alternatives in case something changes. And this all adds up to a cost structure. You need to look at what the key cost drivers are. For example, if you look at the chemical industry, which is where I did a lot of my businesses, on the commodity side, the key driver is cost. And the raw material cost and cost of production can be as high as 80% of your total cost. In the case of specialty chemicals, you're more R&D oriented. And so your cost structure tends to be more heavily weighted to the technological and technical side. Need to understand that. In the case of pharmaceuticals, for example, the large pharmaceutical companies about 20 some odd years ago, maybe 30, started to look at controlling R&D and marketing, and pretty much everything else they wanted to outsource, send it to somebody else. And that was a niche or a gap that I took advantage of. And we would develop synthesis routes to the structures that they identified they wanted, and then supply them back to the pharmaceutical companies to go through the clinical testing and eventual marketing. I remember one that Hoffmann La Roche brought us. They had this molecule, they had 27 synthesis steps to achieve it. That sounds pretty cool, except it really isn't, because if you were to get 90% efficiency on each one of those 27 steps, you take 0.9 to the 27th power, and you get about a 5%, maybe slightly less than 6% overall efficiency for that production. That, quite frankly, is terrible. So we developed a different synthesis route that was 4 steps instead of 27, and each step was 95% efficient, which gave an overall production efficiency of 82%, more than 16-fold better than they had been able to achieve in the lab. Needless to say, they liked us a lot. So then you look at how much do they like you. Next slide.
And just a second here.
Time lag.
I don't know what this is.
That one.
No, revenue stream.
I'm trying to get it to move. Froze up on me. Hang on.
Guess I talked too long.
There we go.
There it is. How much do they like you? What are they willing to pay, and how? And are you going to be generating transactional revenues, or are you going to be generating recurring revenues? So this then makes up your entire business canvas model. Go to the next street. Next slide.
I don't know what's going on here. Every time I go to put over the arrow, something else pops up there. Stay.
Wow, and we went through it this afternoon.
Yeah, I know. It's there.
Ah!
Is that it?
So here we go.
Hey.
What do you end up with? Well, if you look at the way we've been filling out those little squares so far, we've got a whole bunch of guesses there. That's our hypotheses board. It's not really our business strategy board yet. So go to the next slide. What we need to do is we need to check all of these hypotheses that we've put together and click it again. Ask maybe not necessarily difficult questions, but we need to ask the right questions. So click it again. If we don't do this, we're going to be burning cash while we're searching for a working business model. And searching isn't executing. It's just burning up your money. You need to realize that very few business plans survive the first customer contact. You need to go out and you need to check your hypotheses in the real world before you can finalize a business strategy that's going to be doable and is going to be profitable long term. Click the next slide. Click it. Whoop, click it again. I think we went the wrong direction.
That's the next one.
That one's been there. Do it
I
again.
know that. I just went backwards.
We're burning cash.
I know. Okay, you
There it is. You need to get up out of your chair and test your model. You'd be surprised how hard it is to convince people to do that. But you need to get out. You need to talk to potential customers, and you need to find out what it is they really, really want. There's no substitute for getting in front of them and asking the right questions. Next slide. Next slide. Stop selling. Start listening. There aren't any facts inside your building. You need to get outside. You need to talk to the people to whom you want to sell. What are their top problems? And how much will they pay for you to solve them, or for both of you to solve them together? Does your product concept solve their problem? Do the customers agree? How much will they pay? There's a key one there. Draw a day in the life of a customer. Look at the day before you got there. What did they look like? And look at after they get your product. What do they look like? Are they better off or aren't they? Be honest. Go to the next one. Draw the organization chart of users and buyers. Look at the market segments, identify them, see how they're currently satisfied, and see whether what you're bringing really does represent a step in the right direction. Things I've learned along the way: a company's most important strength. I know people say it's people, and it's true, it is the people, but it's the people's ability to bring new thoughts that's going to lead to nimbleness. You need to leave these people space to think. You need to leave yourself space to think. Secondly, working for no pay sucks. So if you're going to start a business, you need to realize that there might be some time when you're not going to be taking a paycheck. I had 3 kids in college when I started my first company on my own, and I went 4 years without a paycheck. So I met the payroll of the company, except for me. And it eventually paid off, thank God. Working with a net can be less stressful within a company. Family businesses are the touchiest to turn around. You're probably not going to look like you thought you would. That's probably one of the key takeaways I've had, is that just about every company I've started, and I've started several dozens, don't end up looking like that first business canvas model that we put together. It was a great outline to start with, but it's not what we ultimately ended up looking like. The next bullet, which is lost now because we went to the next slide, but leverage works best on projects, not on companies. Don't leverage your company. You can leverage projects within a company, but don't leverage the entire firm. And you need to be having fun, or at least convince yourself that you are, or you're not going to survive. The same technology, product, or service will have numerous possible business models. So let's just look at how some of this has played out over the years. Next slide. In the case of Celgene, we had a group within Celanese of very, very smart, talented biochemists. And true to form, when they first started working on a project, they were concentrated on making muconic acid, which is a heterocyclic compound that we hoped would close to form a raw material for nylon. And this would enable us to make nylon from all natural feedstocks. It didn't work out. The bugs got really good at making the stuff, but they made so much of it that they killed themselves off. And then the company took that and figured out how to generate bugs that would eat just about anything. And we ended up making a business out of that and selling it to the GE Waste Management division. And one day, one of these guys came in and he said, he was a Scottish fellow. He said, "Hey, Matt, we ought to make thalidomide." I don't know how many of you remember thalidomide, but thalidomide was a drug that was around in the 60s, and it was originally developed to combat morning sickness and ended up resulting in babies born with no limbs. They were born with no arms and legs, and thalidomide was forever banned from the world. So I looked at this guy and I said, "What are you, crazy?" And he said, "Well, wait, hear me out." He said, "We've got this technology. We know how to make these aromatic insertions. We can make thalidomide. And if you look at how these fetuses develop, the arms and legs all come out of polyps. So obviously, it's a very strong retardant of any kind of polyp growth. If we could get the approval to market it for colon cancer treatment, it could be a big seller." So I called the FDA, and of course their first reaction was the same as mine. "What are you, crook and phasey? We're not going to do that." I said, "Hear me out. Can we come in and present to you?" So we did. We went in and we made the same presentation. And this same technology that started out as a dream to make nylon ended up being able to produce thalidomide quite cheaply. And the FDA said, "Okay, well, look, it has merit and we'll go through the clinical trials, but we can't allow anybody else to have control of the production. So if it gets approved for this cancer treatment, you can be the only people that are allowed to make it. And we said, okay, we'll live with that. We got out to the rental car to go back to the airport. And I said, you know what? If this works, we've just been handed a monopoly. And that's exactly what happened. Celgene became the sole producer worldwide of thalidomide. And at one time had a market capitalization of $210 billion. We ended up buying a couple more companies in Colorado and Europe, and got bought up by Bristol Myers Squibb about 3 years ago. So don't be scared to cast a wide net. Arboras is another one where we had a technology to recover beta-citosterol from paper company plant wastes. And originally it was the raw material to produce synthetic estrogen. And we got long-term contracts with Bayer, and we got long-term contracts with Pfizer to supply all of this beta-citosterol to their processes for estrogen, which were fermentation-based. And about halfway through the whole thing, I built a plant down in Savannah, and we had several thousand tons of production capability. The bottom fell out of the hormone replacement market because it increased the incidence of breast cancer. So now I've got a plant, I've got a bunch of stuff in inventory, and I've got no market. We started looking around for other uses for beta-citosterol and discovered that in combination with statins, it could lower cholesterol. And we ended up marketing it to primarily Unilever in Europe. We marketed it to the Coca-Cola company here in the States, and it's in your Minute Maid Heartwise, which is an orange juice that has these phytosterols in them. The Bayer Heart Aspirin has these raw materials in it. And we ended up having to look at purifying this stuff even further, because for food uses, we needed 99.9% purity. And for the estrogen, we only needed about 80% because it was going into a fermentation reaction anyway. We ended up buying another company in Newark, Ohio, to do the final crystallization for us. And we marketed the beta-citosterol to the food companies. So we went from being basically a pharmaceutical intermediate supplier to a food ingredient supplier almost overnight. Same technology. Calx-Aqua, arsenic removal. We went from thinking we were going to solve all of the third world problems with arsenicosis in water in Bangladesh, Afghanistan, whatever. We quickly found that even though these health problems are very, very real, these third world companies didn't, or countries didn't have the revenue to be able to pay for this. And so there wasn't very much money for us. So we offloaded that to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and started looking for different ways where we could bring this arsenic and heavy metal removal to bear. And about that time, Rio Tinto Zinc had a mine retention basin collapse in Brazil. They ended up taking a $6 billion hit on their annual report. So we repositioned the company, same technology, to going in and cleaning up mine retention basins. And that's what Calx-Aqua does today. Same technology, different segment. All of these represent what is now called a pivot, but basically is a complete change of direction using our same capabilities and applying them to different sectors. Next slide. What have I learned? Entrepreneurship can be rewarding, so can intrapreneurship. Of the two, the former, entrepreneurship, was more stressful for me, but infinitely more rewarding. Don't undersell your ideas and their worth. don't oversell them either. I mean, look at Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. She had George Shultz and Henry Kissinger and everybody eating out of her hand, and it was, even the customers didn't believe her. So one of the first, or one of the few situations where someone maybe didn't fool the customers, but most certainly defrauded and fooled their investors. Cast a wide net. Don't be afraid to look outside your levels of comfort and look at where your capabilities might be brought to best serve society, and thus to best serve your objectives of at least making a living off what you've developed. I think, oh, in the case of intrapreneurship then, corporations have tremendous untapped opportunities to grow and prosper. There's tons and tons of possibilities within companies that you can bring your technology and creativity to help solve problems. And they'll either keep you as a division within their ranks or spin you out as your own standalone company. But in any event, you'll have a great time, and you'll bring a much added product and service to society. Lastly, I think there's your business plan canvas, but now there's no more guesswork on it. You've got everything answered, and it serves as a quick way to check your business on a daily basis. It gives you the flexibility to shuffle and move things around, and it's all on one page. Next slide. This is something that I discovered in about 1978 or 77, maybe. I was in my mid-20s, mid to late 20s. And it's Giancarlo Menotti. He's an Italian conductor, composer. He said, "Hell begins on the day when God grants us a clear vision of all that we might have achieved, of all the gifts which we have wasted, of all that we might have done which we did not do." That gets me out of bed in the morning. So I'll open it up for questions. I had one on the chat from Ruth, and it was, what do I think of SPACs? These are specialty purpose acquisition companies, I believe is what the acronym means. And they've been around actually for about 30 years. They've come into favor lately, and I think mainly because they're a lot faster than an IPO. You don't have to go through all of the underwriting and offering memorandums and whatever that you do with an IPO. You basically get together a group of investors that put together this SPAC, which is a specialty purpose acquisition company. The money's put into escrow, so it does generate interest for them. And it's put there specifically to acquire companies and expertise. And if it doesn't pan out, then the money is clawed back and given to the investors. So it's been around. I've never used one personally. I've used investment houses, venture capital. The worst one I had was one that I took over from Warburg Pincus, and there were 7 venture capitalists in it, and board meetings were an absolute hell. So you want to keep your investor group as tight as you can and as small as you can, my opinion, or use your own money. That answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other comments or questions?
Matt,
Yeah.
Warren Buffett's model of buying the companies and then letting the CEOs run it, he doesn't interfere in any way.
Yeah.
Well, have you had any experience with that type of format? Or?
I have, and the key there is making sure that the right people are in place. And I think that when my experience has been that when I go in and present to, say, Goldman Sachs to raise capital, I would say that their eyes glaze over probably within the first 5 minutes. And so after that, what they're looking at is me, or they're looking at the management team to decide whether to make an investment or not. They have no idea what an aromatic insertion is. But, you know, they, like Warburg Pincus keeps me around on a retention or retainer to look at their technologies and give them my opinion of them. What they're focused on mainly is, like Buffett, is looking at the people and the capabilities of the people involved. And that's what they're really investing in. I think it's a good model. I know he got in trouble for not interfering from some of the alphabet groups, but he's made a lot of money. One share of Berkshire Hathaway has done quite well over the years.
You know,
Any
as
more
we,
questions, guys?
I don't know, we talked earlier, you know, as I said, I used to teach entrepreneurship, but you know, you made the point, and it's so true that we talked about this. So many companies go out and they think instead of finding the needs and filling that needs, they're just putting a product out there and trying to create a need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had that work too, but it's so risky. You're much better off dotting your I's and crossing your T's as much as you possibly can before you start spending money. Because as you well know, dollar bills burn very, very easily. And you can't recover them once those puppies are gone. So I, to some people, they look at my lifestyle and what I do and they think it's very risky. To me, I think I pretty much mitigate the risk by doing the homework beforehand. And picking right people. Even that Scottish guy that wanted to make thalidomide, but look what it got us.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Where did you start, Matt? On the bottom of the rung. Where was your beginning?
Well, I had some pretty good jobs in college for the summer, but my first real job out of college was actually in the nuclear industry. And I thought that was the secret. That was the answer to all of our energy problems. And I ended up getting roped into making bombs. So I had to have a super secret clearance. But I worked on some peacetime solutions using radioactive materials. And I got kind of sick of the nuclear industry when I was working on the liquid metal fast breeder reactor. And I went to monitor the progress, and there were all these people sitting around on what people sit on. And I said, what the hell's going on? Or something that diplomatic. And they said, well, we're waiting for QA level 5 to okay this before we can go ahead. See, QA level 5, there were 5 levels of QA within the government. I got to get out of here. And that was the Washington Public Power Supply System that went belly up. They had that liquid metal fast breeder reactor. And that's when I went into the chemical industry. And I went to work for Celanese, which had just come out of bankruptcy. So they were quite open to new ideas. And we had some pretty dynamic leadership in John McComber, who had come from McKinsey. And I went to work for them in technology development and developed a bunch of processes, and then went from that into strategic planning, and eventually ended up as deputy vice chairman of Celanese. But Celgene was one of the companies that I spun out. Told you about all these biochemists. They were very brilliant people, and they were lost in this huge corporation that kept trying to bend them to fit the product slate that was in place, rather than looking at them and saying, you know what, this is a resource we need to spin out. So we did. We spun them out in a little lab in Warren, New Jersey, and we brought in Louis Fernandez from Monsanto to be their first CEO. And unfortunately, that was so stressful, he ended up having a heart attack. So we brought back another one of the really, really bright guys. His name was Saul Bearer. And I had always liked Saul because he was a very good scientist, but he also had a very good business head on his shoulders. And he ended up being the chairman that took Celgene all the way finally to selling it off to Bristol Myers Squibb. So again, getting the right people. And me, I've stuck with turning companies around and developing technologies, and I've lived and worked all over the world, and primarily the chemical and pharmaceutical industries.
You know, Matt, why don't you share with everyone how many countries, different countries you've lived in, and why you know so many languages?
Well, I have a backup slide. I'll just pull it up here because I did make copies of them in case we had a glitch. But I listed them one time. First of all, I was born in Mexico. I'm a Regiomontano. Eloisa knows what that means. And we're very codo. They're the Jews of Mexico. But I was born in Monterrey and then moved to Torreon, and then went down to Cerro de Pasco in Peru and Brazil. So I had to speak, obviously, Spanish, then Portuguese. My mother was German, so she sang to us in German and told us stories in German. And my dad was American, so by the time we entered kindergarten, I already had 4 languages under my belt. And I've lived in the Americas. I've listed them. I've lived and or worked in the United States, Canada, Mexico, Guatemala, Panama, Colombia, Brazil, Venezuela, Argentina, Peru, Chile, and Trinidad. Trinidad sounds pretty sexy, right? But they had natural gas down there, and we ended up putting a methanol plant there. In the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, and Israel. Europe, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, Russia, Albania, Turkey, Romania. In Africa, South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Mozambique. I've lived in Australia, New Zealand, and then I was responsible for Celanese's businesses in the Far East. So I had Japan, Korea, Philippines, India, Pakistan, China, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Taiwan.
You look pretty good for an 800-year-old guy.
Well, one of the bullet points I had in there is you got to have fun. And I have had a lot of fun. I have a lot of other interests. I like music. So I've sung with several symphony choruses and operas, and I play a lot of musical instruments, but I've played in symphonies with my clarinet. And I just keep myself active. I enjoy hunting, fishing. I enjoy the hell out of my kids and grandkids too. So.
Thanks, Matt, for sharing that presentation and your insight into entrepreneurship, which I think many of us have tapped into in some way, but I'm sure we've all actually been able to reflect and learn from what you just presented as well. I'm going to head off, but you guys can obviously stay and have a chat